Robert Plank Show, episode 379, Expert Engines. Use AdWords pay-per-click to get more leads into your local business with Jan Roos. Hey everyone, and thanks for listening. We're talking right now with Jan Roos, and he is an award-winning serial entrepreneur, and he's the founder of ExpertEngines.co. And using techniques developed while building national brands in the hyper-competitive consumer product space, his company has helped small and solo law firms in the most crowded markets in the U.S. generate hundreds of thousands in case billings every year. So Jan, glad to be talking to you.
Glad to be talking with you, Robert.
So we heard a little bit about you. Can you kind of like tell us in your own words, kind of who you are and what you and your company are all about?
Yeah, okay. That's let me see. So basically, at the end of the day, I kind of consider myself a marketer, and I came to this through sort of the background that was mentioned a little bit as being a co-founder of a startup rather than coming from an agency or one of those other different backgrounds. So what I think separates my approach from what a lot of other people do is that I kind of come from the position of being in my client's shoes. And a lot of the times when you're talking about somebody who's running a small law firm or any small business, really, it's, you don't have the ability to take an approach like a Procter and Gamble or a Coca-Cola when it comes to marketing. So, having to have figuring out that stuff for myself, it's basically what I do for clients.
Okay, and so you mentioned their law firm. So do you only work with law firms, or like what kind of people and what kind of companies do you work with here?
So with my company Expert Engines, basically, we're focused on using a very specific channel, which is lead generation on Google AdWords, which happens to work really well with law firms, just because people who are looking for those kind of services typically need to retain them as quickly as possible. So in terms of taking an ad budget on AdWords, which is one of the more expensive channels that you can run, and making an ROI on that, law firms just happen to be a good fit from that perspective. But technically, we have worked with other branches in that like sort of niche of stuff, people that need things quickly. So they come to mind. We've done some work for private investigators, garage door companies, plumbing, dentists, medical surgery, that kind of stuff.
All right, and so when you're working with like like a law firm or a plumber or a dentist, like is the process pretty much the same, or do you have to kind of dig deep and figure out their industry? Like how do those things are those things different?
Right. So, I mean, at the end of the day, the whole process of marketing, in my opinion, is it's just about conveying a message to somebody. I kind of think that the different channels, Google, Facebook, content, social media, whatever, those are kind of different. But like, you have to basically figure out how to sell somebody on something. My background besides doing stuff in marketing has really been in different sales. And I remember I used to have one of my first jobs was working for a value-added reseller in the IT space. So I sold basically everything and anything under the sun. Sometimes you could be trying to position a laptop one day or like, a server the other day or all these different things. But basically, that's really not that much different than, positioning a plumber versus an attorney, because basically you have to look at what it is that they offer, how it differentiates, how they're differentiated from their competition in the marketplace, and present that to a client or a potential prospect in a way that will make them select that person as opposed to the other person that's advertising next to them on AdWords or something like that. So basically, that's kind of the process that, it's kind of oversimplifying it a bit, but getting into just really communicating the right things is at the core of any sort of marketing or sales that somebody does.
Okay, cool. Well, that sounds sort of exciting. Like you can kind of like use your marketing skill, but then also have tons of variety. Like one day to the next, you might be working on the private investigator client or like some other industry. It sounds like a lot of fun there. And so, do you have any kind of interesting case studies or interesting like stories like that where you had a client like that and you kind of saw what they were doing and you kind of worked your magic and kind of I mean, do you have anything like that, like a good sort of before and after story?
Yeah, absolutely. One that comes to mind is actually a private investigator. So this fellow was, and I was doing almost exclusively legal at the time, but it was sort of in front of a friend who came through, and I was just like, yeah, whatever, we'll give it a shot. So basically, this guy ended up, opening his doors in it was June of I want to say 2016. So he like literally starting from scratch. And the whole situation with a lot of private investigators is for the most part they're retired law enforcement or military, And a lot of the times these guys are already on pensions and stuff. So this is not really something that a lot of people are looking to ramp up into $1 million business. That being said, the person that we were working with he was very entrepreneurial, and we were basically saying, okay, look, if you're willing to take the jump on this, we're willing to help him out. So I started working on some pay per click stuff, and I actually had another friend of mine who specializes in SEO was working on that simultaneously. The thing that was awesome is that we were able to get the phone ringing for him within the first few days. And basically, through the stuff that I was doing with him on pay per click, he was able to be in the black from the first month, which was awesome. And then basically, the cases he was getting from that stuff allowed him to grow his practice to the point where, going from opening his doors in June of 2016, when we got to the point where the SEO was kicking in February of 2017, he literally had more cases coming in than he had guys to give the cases to. So he went from a solo practitioner to somebody who's overburdened with leads, which is the best situation to have.
That's pretty cool. Awesome. So when you set that up, you said you got the phone ringing within the first couple of days. I mean, what did you do exactly? Like set up like a landing page with a phone number and then sent Google AdWords to it, or what did you set up for him?
Right. So, I mean, my the process that my company uses to develop these sort of campaigns it's similar but different than most AdWords. So basically, what has to happen in order for somebody to become a client. I always say this when I'm speaking with prospects. It's extremely easy to spend money on AdWords. It's a bit more challenging to end up getting it back. So for a lawyer or any local service business, that happens when somebody's calling the phone. So basically, in order for that to happen, you have to show up in the right people. So, if you're not showing up for the right terms, just say personal injury lawyer. If you're a personal injury lawyer, then, you're not going to get a chance to get those people. You have to have an ad that compels somebody to click. And that's the point at which you're going to actually pay Google. So the worst thing that you can have is a really compelling ad and no way to actually capture the phone call. The way that we've found to do this best is we actually create a series of landing pages. We literally create dozens of landing pages for some different clients that will match a specific query to what people are talking about. And the contrast with this and the rest of the industry, and this is kind of funny. I mean, the first time I actually got into AdWords, back when I was running that startup, I hired somebody and totally lost my shirt. They ate the budget, lost the retainer, the whole nine. So, but the reason for that, and this is kind of a function of what comes from Google, is that it's kind of like looking to solve every single problem with traffic. So it's like let's say that you're getting 2 calls and a $500 ad budget. If you want to say, hey, we need more calls, they'll say, well, okay, let's up the budget to 1,000. They would never say, hey, let's get the conversion rate up, which would get you more calls on that. So that's basically it. So it's like we're creating these integrated systems. So it's really through the entire funnel of the ad, the landing page, and the analytics. So we're actually using tracking numbers, and all the emails are tracked as well, because we need to know, our people from once you have that conversion back in AdWords, there's all kinds of data that you can pull from that. What time of day are these people calling? What geography are these people calling? Are they male? Are they female? What kind of income are these guys having? So that's kind of what you optimize around going forward. And personally, we're usually looking to optimize the cost per lead to get it as low as possible. So like I said, it's like if we can get 20 leads on $1,000 budget, we want to get 25 the next month. And the thing is that it's this just running some of the numbers. I was looking at a study from WordStream, who has a huge amount of data on this kind of stuff. So for the legal space, for example, like the top 10% advertisers are getting a conversion rate of about 6%. So if we're talking about a personal injury lawyer that's paying $50 a click, that works out to about $1,000 per call. And the clients that we're working with, just through, we've spent, hundreds of thousands of dollars in perfecting these kind of systems. We're getting a conversion rate upwards of 20 or 30%. So, we're having those calls that would cost 1,000 with an alleged top advertisers are down to 150 or 200 for most of our clients.
Super cool. So yeah, like whenever I see someone like set up all that sort of testing and tracking, it always looks like a lot of kind of tedious work to get all the tracking links there and to get all the data there. But I mean, it sounds like that's very, very well worth it, because there are all kinds of assumptions people seem to make, and then it's always kind of surprising. Like I know, like whenever I remember to set up that kind of testing and tracking, like I don't do a lot of pay-per-click myself, like my business partner does some of that, but every time I've like split tests or every time I've done some kind of link tracking, I'm always shocked at like I remove something from a page that I think is important, and the conversion rates go way up. Or I put something that I think is obvious or simple in a headline or in the ad copy or something, and the conversion rates go way up. So do you have any sort of interesting stories like that, of like when you were having all this data and making these changes? Anything that you were kind of surprised by? Anything kind of counterintuitive?
Yeah, let me try to think. Well, this is kind of interesting. A lot of the times that we're working on this stuff, it's like kind of we are we're split testing different formats and stuff. So some of the templates that we've been using like for years at this point are actually really not that aesthetically pleasing. So we have for most of our legal clients this like two column format, and we've tested all kinds of super high design whiz bang sort of stuff. And every single time, this kind of ugly two column thing ends up outperforming it. So we use a lot of the stuff ends up looking like black text. A lot of repeating of the calls to action and all that kind of stuff. And that ends up, that's how you're getting the 20-30% conversion rates that we're getting with our legal clients. We actually had a client recently. So he actually was, it's always kind of challenging when you're working with somebody who's having a lot of ideas about this stuff. And the thing about marketing is that there's no like actual profession of it, so everyone seems to be entitled to their own opinion. But anyways, these guys were really wanting to use their own landing pages, and they spent a lot of time trying to develop these, and they looked gorgeous. They looked better than the ones we had set up, but it's when we ended up pushing the campaign live, the conversion rate was in the gutter, and we had to turn it back to the original ugly one, and the conversion rates just started going right back up, just as we expected. So that's the thing. A lot of the times, it's not about what's pretty; it's about what works, and you're not going to really know that unless, like you said, you have the analytics set up.
That's pretty funny when that kind of thing happens, when the ugly web page sells better, and maybe sometimes we kind of like let our own ego get in the way of that. If we have a team that spent a lot of time making the template, or if we spend a lot of money on the template, and it's like, well, yeah, it looks good to me, it converts well for me as the person who created it, but what matters is if it converts for the person who's actually buying it, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, it's like, do you want to have a pat on the back when you're showing this to your friend at cocktail parties, or do you want to have money in your checking account from the people that are calling? I know what I'd choose.
Right, money sounds like a lot more fun to me. So
Yeah,
so
but
great stuff. And like you don't have to reveal too much of your secret sauce on this, but do you have clients that come to you, or like what's your sort of process, or like your strategy of getting new clients? Like, do they just find you by word of mouth, or do you run ads for your own agency to get clients, or like what happens there?
yeah, I'm happy to go into that. So this is actually one of the things that's funny, and people ask me this question all the time. They're like, "Oh, well, do you AdWords for yourself?" And the answer is no, and I actually don't accept any clients that do B2B. So in my opinion, AdWords is really, and this is a pretty central part of my philosophy, just because like the original situation I mentioned where I got burned on AdWords, there's certain things that don't really work for AdWords. And for that perspective, instead of trying to make it work, like, trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, I just look for more, round hole or clients instead of, and that's kind of why I focused on the niches that I have. So it's kind of a combination. At this point, I'm pretty much doing everything through word of mouth. Like we're more or less booked up, so it's waiting list, that kind of thing. But back when I was doing more outbound stuff, the kind of things that were working well for us, I'm a huge believer in outbound email right now. So basically, I would be able to find lists of people on we have virtual assistants building lists and stuff, and there's actually some really cool tools. But again, it's sort of the same marketing message. How can you position the right message in front of the right person? Instead of a click on AdWords, it's going to be an email in the inbox. Instead of an ad that they're going to click on, it's having a headline that people are going to want to click on, and the conversion message is the email instead of the landing page. So it's really just pure numbers at that point. It's like if you have some sort of a sales message that's worth its salt, you can reasonably expect between 5 and 15% of people to respond. So you have to come up with how many responses are going to turn into an appointment, and then basically it's just doing the napkin math in reverse to figure out how many emails need to build to do that. And assuming that you're staying within the realms of canned spam and all that kind of stuff, I think that's probably one of the most effective ways today that you can get in front of people in B2B.
Super cool, and it's funny how kind of everything old is new again, right? Like sending a bunch of a cold email sounds like a very like late '90s thing, and it seems like it kind of went away for a while, and like now it's back again. And so, so you mentioned in there that like you kind of put some work into making that cold email sort of compelling, and you stay within those canned spam laws. But even with all that, do you still run into any any people like hitting the spam button or things like that?
Well, this is kind of ironic. So, I think last time I did one of these things, I had so if you know about can spam laws, basically on anything that's related to a mailing list, you have to have something like logically opted in. But if you're sending out some sort of a cold email, it's really the equivalent of knocking on someone's door. That's not something that's illegal. So I mean, you'll always, if you're going to be sending the amount of volume that's going to actually get this to be an effective driver for your business, you're going to run into people who complain. And this is what I found funny was that people were complaining about this being spam, and then I was actually showing up on their monthly mailing list, which actually fits the definition of canned spam, and I could technically sue somebody for that. Not that I would, but it's really funny, these people who preach and then actually do the exact same thing for themselves.
Right, and I've kind of seen that happen to me too. Like I'll just and I'll shoot out just like a one-time email to someone. Next thing I know, like I don't know if it was like because they manually did it or I ended up in like their address book or whatever the heck happened. And so with these emails, so like I mean, what's sort of the call to action? Is it to reply to the message or call a phone number or like what are you trying to lead them to do in these cold emails?
Yeah, well, one of the important things I believe this in marketing and sales of any kind is that you want to make somebody take the smallest, most realistic step. So it's like, we're not saying, hey, like this is some awesome program, sign here's a proposal, sign this and pay a PayPal invoice. We're saying, look, and this is my personal process to save myself time and also save prospects time. What I'm looking to do from any of those emails is look typically to book a good fit call. So there's a lot of reasons that this stuff isn't going to work for people. If somebody has too much, they don't have the capacity in the business. Sometimes there's nothing I can never tell that just by looking at someone's website. Whether they have a good sales process, whether they have a good attitude about these things. So I usually ask if people what kind of advertising they've done in the past. If they're the kind of person who's exclusively relied on word of mouth, then a lot of the times it's really tough to be the first source of advertising dollars. And even though in my opinion it's one of the best. It's very hard to take somebody across that bridge of being the first dollar that you're spending to get, $5, $10, whatever, $10 back. So that's the kind of stuff that I discussed in a good fit call. And then from that point, it's less automated. It's basically just following up to get a presentation call about doing some specific information. And I always like to do sort of an audit of what's available in their market, what their competition is spending. Like all things equal, it's like, usually I'm showing people 5 or 10 people in their area and they all know them as competitors. Well, these guys are spending $15,000 a month. Do you think they're doing that because it's losing the money? Like, do you want to get into this or not?
And when you do that kind of research on competitors, like, do you normally notice like are some of these spaces more competitive than others? But because like I imagine that in some of these areas, like I mean in like plumbers and dentists, like I imagine that in any town there's probably like a couple of people who have their marketing dialed in, but I imagine that like a majority of them don't even kind of know what they're doing. Is that sort of on the right track or is that way off base?
No, no, you hit the nail on the head. So basically, the thing is, it's weird because there's kind of this weird gulf of getting appropriate help. So like on the one end, you have people who are trying to do this themselves, and if you're trying to run a law practice or a dental practice and do this stuff in a couple of days, like a couple hours a week, it's the same thing. It's like I don't really, it's like, I would rather trust my life savings with an investment advisor than try to, outbid people who are working on Wall Street 24/7. So I think it's like, there's just not a lot, like there's on that level, there's not that. And then the same thing to be said to a lot of levels of these in-house people. But the things that on the other hand, like, these local businesses aren't really able to afford the top agency talent that's out there, and those guys are looking to service the Coca-Colas and all the Google teams that actually it's funny enough, I have some friends here in New York that work on Google, totally unrelated stuff, but to get a key account in Google you have to be an Under Armour or something like that. So there's kind of this weird gap in the middle where a lot of the people that you're competing against are they're operating on a really diminished capacity. And like the thing is, it's I say this all the time. It's like you can drive a car with three wheels, but you're not going to get there as fast, and you're not going to spend as much gas as you should. So basically, a lot of the times, the fact that competition is spending a lot of money in spite of not following best practices is actually a great sign, because you can either spend less and get the same results, or spend the same and get way better results. And the other thing too is that, like, as far as competition goes, Google AdWords isn't really a winner take all game. Basically, because you're only paying for the people that click, there's really nothing lost by having too much competition. And like the niches that we started out with, like my first client was doing personal injury law in New York City. It was like literally the most cutthroat, competitive. There's people who are spending hundreds of thousands of dollars literally per month, that we were batting up against with clients with smaller budgets of like $3,000-4,000 and succeeding. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter if you're getting everything in the pond. If you're spending $4,000 and getting $20,000 worth of cases, that's a win for you, and that's all that matters.
Right. I like that thought process as long as you're growing the business. And that was kind of what I was hearing earlier when you were talking about some of those kind of, I think it was with the personal injury lawyer, with some of those expensive leads, like you could like reduce the cost of a phone call from $1,000 down to $150. And some businesses might not want to stomach that, but if you can run the numbers and know that, okay, if I can turn $150 into $2,000 or $6,000, then I mean, all day long, it's just a matter of having your numbers right.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the thing. It's like, and a personal injury is actually somewhat of a challenging example for that, because they usually do actually take months, sometimes years to close these cases. But we have clients all the time, especially like retainer-based areas of law. They'll close cases before the month is up, and they'll end up being in the black from month one on the campaign. Then basically, you have a money printing machine, which is awesome. And the other thing too is that, like, because most of the things, and like a lot of the things that people believe in PPC, it's complete bogus in my opinion. It's like, people will say, oh yeah, if you speak to Google reps, they'll say, okay, it's going to take about 3 months to figure this stuff out. There's all this, like, this whole kind of thinking out process, but the fact of the matter is that we're getting calls for our clients in 72 hours or less. You'll know what the general ROI of a campaign like this is before the end of the first month. And that's just because we figured out what we're doing on the other side of the click. If you're trying to figure this up as you're going along, you could spend 6 or 12 months trying to figure this stuff out, or you can plug into a system that works and just get the results going like as soon as possible. But that's the thing. It's like, in my opinion, it's like, I take the exact same approach for my own business. I think all things equal, I try to test channels that will be proven correct or incorrect as quickly as possible before I like to choose channels that are going to take forever to have some feedback. I wouldn't start like a content marketing campaign and hope to figure out that, like, the leads that were coming in 12 months are all unqualified, right? I could rather spend a cold email campaign and send out 100 emails and see what comes back, because like I know that tomorrow.
Right, awesome. Why screw around? So, so
Nah.
you mentioned like you have these different kinds of clients. Like you don't work with B2B and you prefer law firms. So, if someone is sort of listening to our conversation today, how would someone know if they're a good fit for you guys and your services?
Absolutely. So I mean, generally these are the criteria that I think make somebody work with AdWords. So first of all is a short buying cycle. So if your clients are taking, so I wouldn't take, for say, like somebody who's like real estate, or like an auto company or something, because it's like the decision to buy a house or a car takes months, and there's all this consideration takes place. Contrast that with something like a personal injury law firm. It's like, when somebody's calling, the term for this is a bleeding neck problem. And then with personal injury, sometimes there's an actual literal bleeding neck. So it's like they can't take 2 weeks to figure out what's happening because they're probably in the back of an ambulance. So if you're the kind of business that people have to make a decision on quickly, it's a much better sign. The other thing is, you want to be in a position where it's a relatively high ticket item. So the thing about AdWords is, like, even on the lower end of things, we're talking about like $2 or $3 per click. So if you're getting even a 10 or 20% conversion rate, you're usually going to be looking at like $20 or $30 per phone call. So if you're making $100 on a phone call, and it costs, and you're closing 1 in 5 people on the phone, paying $20 for that phone call, yeah, maybe you're making your money back, but then you're just doing a bunch of work for free. It doesn't make sense. On the other hand, if we have people who are family law attorneys, they're paying $25 a phone call, but their average retainers in the 2,500 range. So they're paying $100 for a client that's going to pay 2,500. That makes sense. So all things equal, the higher up your average ticket, so to speak, is, the better. I would say probably as a minimum, probably something around $500 probably makes sense. And then finally, it's like ideal but not super necessary because we have being nationwide. But if you don't have nationwide competition, that's probably ideal. The major case for this is stuff like insurance. The thing is that you're going to be, and the reason for that is like you have these giant nationwide advertisers that are just duking it out with budgets that are in the hundreds of thousands and the millions. And the cost per click on AdWords is determined by an auction. So, you're not going to be able to, and they just bid the clicks up to 25, $30 a pop. And, if you're trying to run a, campaign as a local person, it's going to be really tough to get that. And it's unfortunate because sometimes it's like, they just don't have to face the same economics as you. So you could end up paying hundreds of dollars for a call that's not worth that much, but it is to them.
Right. Right, that makes perfect sense. So your sort of ideal client here is someone who has a short buying cycle, has something that's sort of higher ticket to offset those costs, and then doesn't have that nationwide competition because I mean they can outspend you all day long. And so if someone is listening to us talking today and they want to reach out, I know you said you have a waiting list and things like that, but if they want to reach out and get in touch and kind of hear more about you and your services, where should they go?
Yeah, you know what? I'll actually get a custom domain set up for this. So if anyone wants to take a look, I have some resources, and I actually developed a PDF that people can kind of use to determine what it's a sort of an ROI calculator that we actually use internally at Expert Engines. So I'll have that set up at expertengines.co/plank.
All right, super duper. So expertengines.co/plank. You mentioned Under Armour earlier, just it's spelled just like the CEO of Under Armour, Kevin Plank, no relation though. So expertengines.co/plank to reach out to Jan and his agency and just kind of figure out if you guys are a good fit, figure out what he can do for you and his team. And so make sure to go to expertengines.co/plank to find out all the information that you need to know. And I want to thank you so much, Mr. Yon, for stopping by and dispensing some of this super cool knowledge for us.
All right, no, thanks. It was a pleasure speaking with you, Robert.
We really appreciate you listening to today's episode of The Robert Plank Show. Subscribe to us on iTunes and rate and review us at robertplank.com/iTunes.